I'm hoping the Big Ten has to modify their system for us.
Probably like getting grade 10 sandpaper rubbed on your face every day.
I mean, we say it all the time, whether, there's two types of turds, you're a sinker or you're a floater, but you're still a turd, right? I
mean, we are about players and players playing the plays and not necessarily the plays.
Welcome to the Varsity Club podcast. My name is Derek Peterson. Joining me this week, a little later on, I'm going to have Jacob Padilla to talk about Nebraska basketball opening its season. But right now, I've got Brandon Vogel joining me remotely via Zoom. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very envious of your bookshelf. And I think about this every time we're on like a Teams call or a Zoom call or whatever. I see your bookshelf and I'm like, this is the way that an adult's office is supposed to look. And it's my goal to have a bookshelf like this one of these days.
Yeah, this isn't going to translate for the podcast, but I actually wrote all of these for just since the start of the pandemic.
Oh yeah, so. Yeah. You have just a bookshelf or a bookcase that covers an entire wall in your home, and
yeah, I wrote them all. A lot of them are under pen names. You won't, if you search Brandon Vogel on Amazon, you won't find them. But it's just something I like to do in my spare time.
You will find one though.
You will find one. Yeah. Dream Like a Champion with John Cook. Check that out ahead of Nebraska volleyball getting started here. Hopefully in another few weeks. Team is loaded for bear, so that's going to be fun.
I honestly did not plan to plug your volleyball book in this podcast, and it just kind of organically happened. I would like to have a bookcase in my home though, but my wife is hell-bent on our second room that is currently being used as an office being like a guest space, even though we've never had guests come visit us. And so there has to be a futon in there on the wall instead of a bookcase. And the futon has to be available to be made up anytime, even though we've never had anyone come to visit us. And
Same.
with COVID, we might not have anyone come visit us for the next decade. So
that's true. We don't entertain a lot of guests, but when we were looking at a new house, a guest room was high on the list of needs. So I get it. My bookshelf recommendation is, so these are they're fine. They're kind of crappy IKEA bookshelves that I've had for a decade. More than a decade at this point, and I don't really like them much. My bookshelf advice, my professional bookshelf advice is, once you feel like you're settled someplace, find a person to build you custom bookshelves. That's the move. So,
ooh, that does seem like the move.
Yeah, because then you can get them whatever you want them to look like, whatever size restrictions you need. You can do it. These have worked fine. Like I said, I'm still using them more than a decade later, but that's the play.
Do you have a book recommendation that's on your shelf?
Let me turn and look quick. So this middle section is the sports reference section, and then we got fiction over there, nonfiction over here. I'm going to say, just because it's the one catching my eye at the moment, The Courting of Marcus Dupree. Well, here you go. You're an Oklahoma grad. I'm sure you probably saw the 30 for 30 on Marcus Dupree. Willie Morris I think he was an English professor. He's a professor or something at Ole Miss, and kind of covered that Marcus Dupree recruitment 25 years before ESPN ever got there. It's a really excellent book. It's really well written. So if you're in the college football market, Courting of Marcus Dupree is really, really good book.
My mom asked me for a Christmas list because I'm still a child and I still give my mom Christmas lists in late November, early December. And there are a bunch of books on my Christmas list this year. One of them I'm very excited about. It's the modernization of Premier League soccer and how it has kind of happened by Michael Cox. I will add this Marcus Dupree book to the list. I got a message back from my mom because there are Nike socks and then books, and she's like, "This is a very, very weird Christmas list from you." So, let's talk about Nebraska football. We're recording this on a Wednesday, early this week. You might be listening to this on Thursday. You might be listening to it on Friday morning because Nebraska football is playing Friday morning or Friday afternoon or at noon. And I imagine a bunch of people have on their Christmas list decent Nebraska football for the first time in a long time. Last week, was, and we'll talk about this, bad? I don't know. I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about you, Brandon, and people will probably roll their eyes because you're my boss, and this is going to sound kind of kiss-assy, but like you don't get caught up in like the emotional swing of like one specific game. See, I have a proclivity for takes, and I kind of can run hot and cold, and you're just like, no, let's just kind of stay grounded in our take tank, so to speak, and just kind of work through things methodically. Frost called it an embarrassing moment that he didn't see coming. The 41-23 loss to Illinois. What was your overall feeling after that game? Like, are you worried about the direction of this program? Let's just start here. Are you worried about the direction of this program after that one game, or was it like, okay, it's not as bad as it looked?
I think it might be both of those things. But I think there's reason for concern just because. You're now 4 games in. So that was game 4 of year 3. So, what would that have been the equivalent of? Would that have been it would have been the Cincinnati game under the normal 2020 schedule, normal 2020 12-game schedule, which based on how Cincinnati looks, maybe not a bad thing that Nebraska missed out on the Bearcats.
Might have been a slaughter.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I said, just going to say it might have been a slaughter.
Yeah, and that's kind of the overall point. But the difference there would have been is like Cincinnati was a preseason top 25 team, and people expected them to be good, and they've been even better. Illinois is not, it's probably not going to finish a year better than it did last year. I'd be surprised if that were the case. But it's still a conference team. But the point is like it was further proof of, Nebraska's not past this yet. Which in year 3, and really even in year 2, and this was why last year was so angsty, it wasn't ever actually, I think, about hype. It was about the fact that Nebraska didn't live up to that hype. Like, you have a natural progression, whether it be for an individual player, be that a quarterback maybe, or a team of, okay, year 1, we'll grant any team anything. It's just make improvement. And if it doesn't show up on the field, that's not a problem necessarily, though everyone would love it if it did. You get to year 2, you expect to see some progress, and there wasn't a ton last year. It was the same thing that we're kind of seeing now, which is the issue. The heart of the issue is Frost is saying we're seeing the progress internally. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that this will work. But until you, the person on the outside, can see it, you just kind of have to take him at his word. And the longer that goes, fewer and fewer people are able to continue believing that. So I think that was a large source of the angst. In terms of how bad did it look, Nebraska played about as poorly as I think you can play. And sometimes that just happens, which isn't to excuse it. It's just like there's little doubt in my mind that they'll play better against Iowa. Doesn't mean they'll beat Iowa. No, not necessarily. But they won't play as poorly, I don't think, as they played at Illinois.
I think the saving grace right now is that they played a half toe-to-toe with Ohio State, who might be one of the best teams in the country. They only lost by 8 points to Northwestern, who also might be one of the best teams in the country, that might have one of the best defenses in the country. There's good stuff from them on tape in year 3. There's also just some really bad stuff. There's some really bad stuff. Like, everybody, talks about the Penn State win. They only had 95 yards of offense in the second half. It wasn't like, they escaped with a win in that game. It wasn't like they, took it away from Penn State. Penn State just missed at the end. A little bit of breaking news on the podcast. Rashad Bateman has opted out again. Minnesota wide receiver. Wow. After further dialogue with Coach Fleck and my family, we decided that after this most recent COVID-19 outbreak and the cancellation of this weekend's Wisconsin-Minnesota game, that it made the most sense to begin to focus on the next stage of my career. Minnesota. It's been a rough year. Has it been a rougher year for Nebraska or for Minnesota? Man.
That's hard to say.
It might be Minnesota. Because so much of last year, it was like, okay, you were really good. You surprised a lot of people, but now it was like, okay, can you, they almost had to validate what they did last year a little bit with the way that they played this year. And I think, maybe it's not totally on Fleck or Minnesota. Like maybe, there are forces outside their control working here, but like they're kind of invalidating what they did in a lot of people's eyes, which kind of sucks.
Yeah, it does. I think I kind of looked at this year coming in back when we thought it would be a potentially normal year as a slight step back for Minnesota. So if the expectation broadly was for them to come out and say, yep, this program's built to be here to stay. Last year wasn't a fluke. Like, I don't know if I ever expected that or if I ever thought that was that fair of an expectation. Like, they just lost so much defensively. And that's the issue right now. They're getting murdered on defense. Like, teams are just creating scoring chances virtually every time they have the ball. So it seems. And they can't stop anybody.
They are last in the conference in rushing yards per carry allowed. Dead last.
Yep. It's a huge problem. And so that's even greater than what you'd expect from just having to replace some pretty key players. But Mohamed Ibrahim's been as good as anybody in the league, like regardless of position, I think. So, it's a little bit of, they took a step back. It's probably a bigger step back than even you would have projected. And then you've got things like this. So Bateman has been out and then back in, didn't go the way, Minnesota, their season, they're playing out the string, and they also had to cancel this week. So there's that part of it too. And then he's opted back out. So those are the parts of things that might add a little bit of fuel to the fire, but probably shouldn't, I guess.
Let's go back to Nebraska. And I think the place that everybody would assume that we would start would be quarterback. You kind of mentioned it. But I want to start with the offensive line because I think what we're seeing right now is incredibly problematic. You talked about showing progress. This is year 3. There's no excuse on their offensive line. None. They have 2 senior guys, one at left tackle, one who used to be a right tackle. Now he's at right guard, kind of playing center. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they're trying to play him at center. I feel like it weakens 2 spots for them, but that's whatever. We might get into that. We might not. We don't have to. They like the advanced metrics on this offensive line. It doesn't say that Nebraska's terrible, but when you watch them, it looks like they're getting worse week in and week out. Does it not? Like, we had a question in our mailbag this week that says you've seen 4 games. Who are your starters on the offensive line? And I didn't provide any context, but I said I'm replacing Cam Jurgens with Will Farniok and moving Matt Farniok back to right guard. Ethan Piper has been okay. Brendan Hymas has been okay. Like, there's nobody that's been great, right? Like, that offensive line, we were told that offensive line was going to be one of the strengths of the team, that they were going to be a team that could run the ball really well. This projected as a team that was going to be able to run the ball really well. I mean, part of it is they have 0 downfield passing threat, and so teams are playing the run. Teams have no respect for their passing game. They're playing the run. They're loading the box. They're playing their corners soft. They're bringing safeties up. That's not helping. But, like, their offensive line right now, it seems like it's trending in the wrong direction. Would you agree with that? Or are you surprised by that?
Yeah, it's not headed the way that I thought it would be. And it's been a bit of a disappointment because I thought, like, part of my optimism around Nebraska football going into this year was that group. With the experience they had coming back, the fact that somebody like Ben Hart kind of won a job and allowed Matt Farniok to quote unquote move to his best position was encouraging. So, I mean, obviously you're going to live with some growing pains there with just a redshirt freshman and a young player. But as a group, and moving Greg Austin, giving him the run game coordinator title, and who knows what that actually means in practice. It's just a title really to us, like we haven't been able to see any practice whatsoever. And even the parts we would see in a normal year probably aren't offering a lot of insight, but it is trending in the wrong direction. Like, the run game, Nebraska's stats are weird. Like, their rushing success rate is still relatively strong. Their O-line yards are still relatively strong. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of that was from doing decent work early on. And you're right, it's been going the wrong way. So to look at that and, you could potentially run a lot of those guys back in the future, but you're at a point now where it's like, do you want to? Should it just be an open competition again for everybody? Which, technically it is to some degree, but I don't know. And I don't know what, how much missing Mills at running back has to do with that, but it feels like, I go back to this all the time, but that Minnesota game last year where you could just like see the frustration dripping off Frost as he talked about, we can't run the ball. Our best runs are quarterback runs. Like, are things any different right now?
No,
like,
they're not.
The quarterbacks are their two, leading rushers, both in terms of yards and attempts. Mills has missed basically 2 games now, but your answer in that scenario was to run Wan'Dale Robinson, a guy that we talked all offseason about not wanting to kind of put those miles on him. So it's kind of a bizarre mess. And I do think you have to start with the offensive line when looking at that.
Yeah, McCaffrey has more carries. He has 56. Now I haven't factored sacks out of this. I probably should, but just looking at the raw numbers, he has 56 rushing attempts this season. There are 4 running backs that have played have 53. So like, and I think too that some of the quarterback rushing stuff is kind of smoke and mirrors just because of what McCaffrey's been able to do scrambling. Just because, and Adrian is this way too. They are dynamic runners of the football. They're not, jury's still out on McCaffrey as a passer, but they don't have tremendous passers right now. But those guys are kind of undeniably dynamic runners with the football. And so like I said, it's kind of smoke and mirrors a little bit right now. The thing that is maybe most, I'm not going to say alarming, but surprising to me is center right now. Cam Jurgens has another foot thing. This is starting to look like maybe this is a guy where you shouldn't have packed as much weight onto his frame as you did, as quickly as you did, or, and this would be more problematic in the long term, he's not a guy that can handle that much weight on his frame because he continues to have foot things. It is Nebraska in an issue right now because it doesn't have a center on the roster. It doesn't have a true center on the roster. Cam Jurgens is a converted tight end. He's snapped the ball for 2 years. Will Farniok was not a center in high school. Is this position an issue for you? And like I said, like when they move Matt, I don't understand moving Matt Farniok to center because Frost said it in his availability on Wednesday. He essentially said that Matt Farniok practices at right guard during the week and has been. And so moving him to center for game days, they either don't trust Will Farniok or something is going on there. I don't know. I can't put a finger on it. But like, is it alarming to you that they do not have a center on the roster and have not recruited, and correct me if I'm wrong, but don't have one in this recruiting class, and now we're in year 3?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they made kind of the bold move to move Jurgens there. And I think a lot of people could see why they would do that. And you're right. You're looking at kind of a nagging or either a nagging injury or, just one of those guys who has a propensity to deal with injuries a lot. And, we've all seen guys come through various programs and sports like that. And it sucks when that happens, but some people are just a little bit unlucky on that front. So they're either in a spot where they like their backup right guard better than they like their backup center, hence moving Matt Farniok to center. But yeah, it's a bit of a problem because where does that leave you? You're kind of looking at, okay, well, when is the backup center going to get ready? AJ Forbes, who was a walk-on but was a player I liked quite a bit, decided to transfer. I think he would have been in the mix there. Who knows? You're just projecting, but yeah, you would like to not have to reshuffle again if Cam can't go. And that was, to go back to what we expected of the offensive line, that was supposed to be another thing that was a little bit different this year, just a little bit more of a rotation, have some more bodies available. And that's been the case at a couple of spots, but center's not one of them. And it's hard because you don't notice having a good center when you have one, but you sure notice it when you're struggling at that spot. And that's kind of where Nebraska's at.
So, and I don't want to harp on the kids, but I don't think Matt Farniak has particularly been great at right guard either. And he's kind of talked about the speed there. It was something that he's had to adjust to. Now, he played on the perimeter, so the speed is different. It's different. He's going to have to adjust, and he's had to. He's had to adjust to it. Where do you place the blame right now? And this is kind of, this could lead to just a more broad offensive discussion, because a lot of the discussion this week has been coaches talking about, hey, we got to put these players in a better position to succeed, and the players are talking about, hey, we got to execute. And both things are true. But who is it like 45-55 leaning towards the coaches, 55-45 leaning towards the players executing? Like, where are you at right now? Because this offensive line, like we said, was supposed to be a strength. Brendan Hymas was talked about as a guy who could be one of the best left tackles in the conference and the country. That has not happened. Is this a development thing and a development issue? Is this just an execution issue? Like, where are you at with that?
Yeah, I think, and I guess to try and account for my own potential bias here, like if you were to take like a 6-6 team and just pluck them at random and say, why are they 6-6? By default setting is probably like 60% coaching, 40% players. I just think particularly at the college level, coaching matters the most. And when you factor in that the coaches are the ones who select the talent, you're also kind of covering recruiting with that too. So I guess with that being the case, maybe you add a little bit to the coaches tab. Like they've had some really high profile wins on the offensive line recruiting wise. And those guys are still young. So maybe it's just a little bit too early. Like realistically, I haven't sat down and watched intently Bryce Benhart. He's more a guy who pops onto my radar when I see him doing something good or something bad. So I get either ends of the extreme. But just to look at what he's actually doing, might be a more fair judge of where they're at offensive line wise. But when you look at the offense as a whole, they've tried to build that wide receiver depth. Even if like all of the guys that they brought in or that stayed in from this recruiting class were playing and doing big things, they'd still want to be deeper. So I think there's some misses there. You can look back at that 2018 class with the junior college guys that they brought in that you didn't get the production you needed to help you right away out of there. I mean, I think there's been some recruiting misses here and that's part of it. But the strange thing about the offensive line is I wouldn't say that that's the case yet. I mean, I'm certainly not chalking up Cam Jurgens as a miss at this point, even though he was recruited as a tight end. So I look at it and it's always tough to assess that between are the players being coached at an appropriate level? And if so, then are they not executing it? It's hard because Nebraska, I think, misses on both of those occasionally throughout these games. And it feels like a little bit of a cop-out or a kind of middle-of-the-road answer, but you're still fighting that war on both fronts, at least from what we've seen so far.
Does some of this offensive line stuff sort of maybe not excuse, but explain away what's going on with quarterback? Or maybe, like, in your eyes, help to not make the quarterback position look like it has regressed so much? Like, because, like you think about the way that McCaffrey has operated in his 2 starts, he hasn't had great line play. Teams are blitzing him. Teams are bringing pressure. He's kind of running for his life a little bit. One of his interceptions, his one interception against Penn State, he got hit, and it just kind of floated up. So when we talk about the quarterbacks, which I guess we'll do next, how much does the offensive line play factor into your evaluation of the quarterback play so far?
A little bit. So in terms of pass protection, Nebraska hasn't been great, but I don't feel like it's been terrible there. which, is even that a little bit disappointing, I guess, would be the question, because if you're a good and talented offensive line, which I liked the talent level at Nebraska coming in, and, it's not like this year has wiped that all out entirely, but it hasn't been as good as I thought it would be. Like pass blocking should be technically the easy part. Now, you're going to run into matchups where nobody's blocking Chase Young. That's just a tough day at the office for whoever has to take that assignment. But for the most part, like pass blocking should be the easy part. So yeah, I think you added in, you look at that interception with McCaffrey against Penn State where he was hit. That was one. But then you go to that Illinois game, and it seemed like he had enough time for what they want to do. It was more his own stuff of sitting back there and not seeing it, or seeing the wrong things, or not being confident enough in where guys were and where they were supposed to be to just make quick throws. How much time did he spend kind of sitting back there, and what was that play designed? Like what, how quickly is he supposed to get through that progression? And that was kind of, I think against Northwestern, certainly was something you noticed with Martinez, is there was a lot of kind of, the upload speeds weren't really quick, for lack of a better term. You could see him sitting back there and kind of laboring through it. So that part I kind of put solely on the quarterbacks and how they're presumably being taught. And that I don't think you can chalk up to the offensive line.
Okay. I don't yet want to go to talking about offensive coaches needing to maybe lose their jobs. I don't want to go there yet. I know some people might be there yet. I don't want to go there yet. Let's just get this question off the jump. Do you go back to Adrian Martinez, or do you stick with Luke McCaffrey? Luke is a redshirt freshman. He's only started 2 games. Nebraska lived with Adrian Martinez's warts in 2018. He did, he had his kind of, oh my God, what the heck did you just do moment against Ohio State in the horseshoe. Luke McCaffrey had his, oh my God, what did you just do moment against Illinois on the first play of the game. It sucked. Frost said it's a mistake that you can't make. It was a terrible call, but also he put them in that position with the decision that he made, right? So, like, neither guy has been great, and Luke hasn't. It doesn't look like he's going to be able to sustain what they hoped they were going to get by going to him. At least that's what it looks like through the first 2 games. So, do you go back to Adrian, or do you go with Luke? I wrote, after they made the decision, I was like, it feels like, or before they made the decision, I said, it feels like the part of the reason that this decision is weighing on Frost is because this feels like the moment where if you switch quarterbacks, it turns the page on the Adrian Martinez era. It moves to the next one. It says, all right, Luke, this is your time now. Adrian, we tried it. It didn't work. Now you're 2 games through, and we're back to, well, do you go back to him? What do you think?
Not having seen either guy practice this week, of course, I think from a, I guess then theoretical standpoint, I do think Adrian probably gives you the best chance to win against Iowa, because I feel like I know more about him in the passing game than I do about Luke McCaffrey at this point. And yes, part of what we know about Adrian in the passing game is that it's not perfect. In fact, it's not close to perfect, but I feel like Nebraska can run more of its offense with him. You at least know that he's seen this stuff many more times. That's the experience edge. He's shown the ability to make those throws occasionally. The big issue is just not making them consistently enough. And he played poorly against Northwestern. Played well enough, like executed what they tried to do, which wasn't that adventurous in the passing game, but executed it against Ohio State for the most part. His game against Iowa, Ohio State from 2018, is the game everyone remembers from Adrian Martinez. His game against Iowa was better. He completed 68% of his passes against a really good defense. And part of the reason I lean towards him, and it's a close decision either way, is just what Iowa's able to do. They've got the typically tough Hawkeye defense that they seem to have every year. They don't give up explosive plays either way. They give up a few more in the passing game. They're a little bit worse in terms of efficiency on passing downs and standard downs, which is like a bizarre kind of chink in the armor for a defense that's good in about every other category. So for those reasons, and Nebraska just needs this generally to beat any team. Nebraska needs more from its passing game. I think Adrian is more ready to provide more, whatever that looks like. And it wouldn't take a lot to be more at this point. I think Adrian's closer to providing that this week than Luke is.
Yeah, the thing that's so frustrating about this conversation is like you go back to the way that they closed 2018 and think about how optimistic everyone was about the team and the progress that it was making and the way that it had closed. And then you say, okay, well, what was like the sole driving force for that? It was the quarterback. He played well. And it wasn't just him running it, it was him throwing it. He played well.
It really changes a lot. And that's the hard thing for people to wrap their head around right now. And myself included is, so what changed? Last year, the official explanation was the players around Adrian need to be better. Okay. And maybe that's carryover. Maybe that's still true, but you still could go back and watch that Northwestern game and you can feel like the weight of everything that's come before it. The brilliant start, the brilliant freshman year, the sophomore year that didn't go quite to plan. And, it feels like, Adrian knows he's like, okay, I need to have been further along in my decision-making and I'm not yet. And it's hurting my decision-making now. And that's totally me projecting, but just like, that's what it looked like watching him play against Northwestern.
It's kind of ironic that it's a brilliant start and then a struggling middle portion. And now you feel pressure towards the end. It's kind of the way their games go too.
Yeah, it really is. So you look at this as a whole, the 2020 season as a whole, come out and score first against Ohio State. Okay, that's good. Nebraska moves the ball first drive against plenty of people. But you're in that game until 4 or 5 minutes or left in the second quarter. And then Ohio State gets rolling a little bit and, they're getting the ball and you're like, okay, this is trouble. And it turned out to be like, they broke the game open and that was that. Northwestern, you lead at halftime. Penn State, you've got a big lead at halftime, which was really key because it allowed Nebraska to be really, really safe with Luke to, make manageable passing plays for him and really lean on him running. But against Illinois, bizarrely through circumstance and for the fact that Nebraska really didn't show up in any area, you fall behind early. And that's when you really see the limitations Nebraska is experiencing offensively, I think. And part of the reason why I think actually Saturday looked worse than it was. If that play gets called back, who knows? Like, even if Nebraska gets to punt on that first drive, might drastically change things. But this is a team that is still obviously very much in progress. And I don't mean team, I mean program. So look at it from a 3-year view. A program still very much in process. It's a program that needs to have good things happen to it early. So if you want something to watch on Friday, that'll probably be a pretty big one.
Yeah, small margin for error. After the game, players said, yeah, we didn't practice well enough. There wasn't enough intensity. And players have said that kind of throughout the beginning of this week, that there needs to be more focus in practice. That's in a lot of instances, regurgitating what they hear from their coaches. That's the way the coaches want them to think and operate, that what you put in during practice week is what you reap is what you're going to sow on game days. That's the way they want them to operate. But then you have Scott Frost, who says, I didn't see this coming. In terms of maybe organization with this team right now, are you nervous at all about where they're at? They've had, because this is not a new thing with them, a lack of preparation and practice. It's strange to hear, like, yeah, they got one win and then they were like, okay, we're good. We've made it. And then, and Greg Smith and Jay Foreman talked about this on their podcast, and I hadn't thought about it like that, but it was like That's kind of been the messaging from Frost, hasn't it? You get one win, and then this is going to turn. Hey, we just need one win, and then this is going to turn. They've had whatever with, I don't know. It seems like an organizational thing that continues to not get worked out. Is that cause for concern with you at all?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think that disconnect between, and again, like some of it might be semantics, kind of like you said, the players sometimes get coached on what to say, particularly after a game like this where it's going to be rough and people are upset. Mm-hmm. The fan base is upset. You're going to have to take some tough questions. But that disconnect between I didn't see this coming to every player saying, yeah, it wasn't our best week is troubling, because being a successful football coach is controlling that. And I don't mean to minimize that, because it's brutally hard. Like it's brutally hard to do that. And it's why Nick Saban and Alabama are kind of such a remarkable example of football success. Like they may get beat a couple of times, and it's only a couple of times. But they got this part locked down. And I think when you think about kind of trying to rebuild a program, build it back up, whatever term you prefer there, the stages are, in my mind, like you lock up the execution part of it. Like you really don't have much control over how good you're going to be year one. Sometimes you can come in and your message clicks and it's great. Sometimes you can come in, message is received by some, not by others, and you struggle. But you have to control what you can control. And that's like the effort and the execution. Like, I don't care if we win or lose these games early on, we're going to out execute those teams. And then, so you start doing that and you start seeing some belief, then you can start adding talent advantages on top of it. And you can start getting quote unquote your guys in all of those things. And I think for coaching tenures that work, particularly those that start slow, that's what it is. Ironically enough, Kirk Ferentz won one game his first year as Iowa's head coach. And then I think they won 3 games. And then in year 3, it went 7-5. So got to that bowl game, but that's 11 wins over 3 years. Frost is at 10 right now. So who knows? I mean, it's part of why this game is so important, I think, for Nebraska. A win is what everybody wants, of course, but just to come out and play well would be a big thing. But the overall point is I do not think that Nebraska at this point has locked in like, well, we've got our execution down. We've got our techniques down. Like, you're not going to step wrong and it's going to give up a 56-yard run. Like, that part's done. That part's gone. We know we're not going to do that. We might be less talented. We might be outcoached. And that's the thing. It's all still there. Like, it's all still a crapshoot going into each of these games. Like, well, maybe this is a game where they execute well. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's one where the effort's there. Maybe it's not. And that's where you really start to have to get a little bit worried, I think, about the progress of this program and what it has to do to change that.
Somebody asked us in our mailbag this week if we'd rather have Tom Allen as the head coach, Indiana's head coach, if we'd rather have Tom Allen over Scott Frost at this point. I'd like to get, and this is what I said in the mailbag, I'd like to give the benefit of the doubt a little bit to Scott. He's still a very young head coach.
Yep.
And so some of that stuff is going to get worked out. But, I mean, you just can't, you can't have some of the issues where, you can't practice like normal because you're not ready for it. That's stuff that it just can't happen in a year 3. How, you kind of touched on it, I was going to ask you this question next. How important is this next game? Is this game against Iowa? It's a rivalry game. It just means more. It means more. And Frost is never going to, well, I shouldn't say never. So far, it seems like he's a guy that's not going to play up rivalry games or not going to play up stakes for games that are bigger than just, well, it's just another game on our schedule. It's the next team on our schedule that we have to continue to play well. How important is this game contextually for, like, them as a program kind of trying to establish themselves in the Big Ten West, but then how important is this game right now for them to show, hey, we have progress in general, so that we don't see another tweet from a pass catcher prospect after the game of like, what am I supposed to think right now?
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest danger. Like, getting a win would, in a lot of ways, well, not in a lot of ways. It depends on people's perception of Iowa. And my perception of Iowa is really high right now. Like, that's a really good football team that could be 5-0 very easily. And they're playing really well right now too, is the thing. And also they've won 5 straight. So you should have all of the motivation plus, like, hey guys, you were really bad last week. You got to come out and not be bad again. Like, we can't put 2 of those performances back to back. So whether or not, it's not a must win for Nebraska, I don't think, because, part of my whole approach is that one game on its own doesn't really change. It shouldn't really change perception to the degree that it does, but it's important for them to play well and to show that, hey, we're not as bad as the team that lost last week. And if you want to use Iowa as our measuring stick right now, even if, that's not anything that makes anyone happy, and it's not anything anyone on the staff is going to do, here's at least proof that, there is some progress. Because right now, that's the thing. Like, Frost he keeps saying that I see the progress. Like, I know this is going to turn around. And for everybody else, just like, okay, but why isn't it on the field? You need something that backs that up a little bit. And I think playing Iowa at this specific time, playing Iowa well, has the potential to do that. So it's more of a, I guess, sorry, Derek, I'm really terrible at being succinct, which you probably know by now. But it's a game that has more upside than downside to me for Nebraska.
It's not a must win, but it's certainly a must play well.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
and I really do expect Nebraska to play well. Last week was really bad. You almost can't be as bad as that again, but though you hesitate to even say that, because then they come out and prove you wrong. But I do expect Nebraska to play well against a really good defense. Offensively, Iowa is basically identical to Nebraska. It just looks a lot different when you pair that with a team that ranks 3rd against explosive plays and 2nd against explosive rushing plays and 11th against passing plays. So if you're top 15 at not giving up big plays, your offense can be a little bit middle of the road.
Yeah. You have a much larger universe of Nebraska games to pull from when you say, well, it can't be that bad. And then I'm over here like, I've seen 4 seasons now, and it's always been like, well, it can't get worse, can it? And then it gets worse. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we will.
I had somebody, I shared Frost's, I think you bring up a really good point, because I shared Frost's, or I tweeted out a quote from him where he was like, if you're in the building, you see the progress. It was another one of those quotes where he was like, I see it moving forward. I see it. I can see it. And somebody said, does he ever elaborate on like reasons why he believes that? And I kind of sat there and thought about it, and I was like, that's a really tough thing to get from a fan, because that says that they don't see it and that they're watching game days and they can't see it. They can't see anything. We got another question in our mailbag that said, what building blocks do we have right now? And to be getting those questions in year 3 is rough. So I agree with you. It might not necessarily be a must win, because I don't think that they're going to win, but it definitely is they have to play better. So we'll see. Well, Brandon, you've got work to do, I'm sure. You've got a podcast coming out also. Kind of, was it around the same time? It's Thursday morning too, right?
Yeah. So I debated moving it up a day with the earlier game day, but I decided we'll go with Thursday. So that's you can listen to that one as well. Go into a little bit more of how Nebraska, I think, has a shot in this game. I also have some hot Thanksgiving takes on turkey and ham, so you can check that out.
Are you a turkey and cranberry sauce guy?
I will eat some cranberry sauce. It's not like my my favorite thing. And no, I'm not. Gravy goes on my turkey, not cranberry sauce like Frost.
Okay, excellent. Are you a ham guy? What is your ham hot take?
Well, you got to listen to the podcast to find that out. The short version is these people who come out and say turkey is actually bad. I'm not here for that. That's not a hot take. Nobody's favorite food is turkey. Like, you haven't found that person. Okay. Like, turkey is fine, and if you care for it a little bit, it can be pretty good. But ham is better. Like, ham is obviously better.
No,
but it's not Thanksgiving.
No, it's not. Ham is not better. No,
well,
ham is not better.
Listen to the podcast and find out why. My short answer is you're eating the wrong ham.
My Thanksgiving take, and it's not going to be as fleshed out or nuanced as yours, but my Thanksgiving take is just that ham is trash. And that's really like my holiday food take, that ham should never be part of the dinner. We don't have a Christmas ham. We've never done that in my household because probably because I throw a fit about it all the time. I think we do meatloaf for Christmas. I think that's one of the things that we do for Christmas. We do a meatloaf. Or we do a turkey. My grandma tries to do hams for Christmas, and I think I tried to shut that down a handful of times. Okay. Turkey is the far superior of the two. Especially when you put gravy on it.
Yeah, as a gravy delivery device, it's excellent. But give me some time. I can sway you on that ham thing.
Won't happen.
Ham can be worse than turkey, but like I said, check out the I-80 Preview podcast. I spend the first section of the show on this, so go back and listen to that before. Depending on when you listen to this, hopefully before the Huskers kick off against Iowa, because it's a preview podcast. So
yeah,
you can listen to it after then. It's all the same to me, but yeah, it works best that way.
It's a better delivery device beforehand. So write your book on why ham is better than turkey. Put it on your bookshelf, and I will put it on my Christmas list.
Okay, all right. I'm not. Yeah. It might take me book length to fully explain what I tried to do in like 6 minutes.
Okay. On
the podcast. So that'll be a preview.
All right. Brandon, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks a lot.
Up next, you guys are about to hear an interview that was pre-recorded, not by me, but by our Hail Varsity radio guy, Chris Schmidt. He had the Athletics' Scott Dochterman. Scott follows the Hawkeyes. This interview is actually going to air on the radio show Friday morning. So listen to that pregame. But my listeners get to hear the interview now. So here is Scott Dochterman from The Athletic talking to Hail Varsity Radio's Chris Schmidt about Nebraska, Iowa.
Another showdown for Nebraska, Iowa. What a crazy mixed-up season this has been in the Big Ten. I want to go back to the first couple of weeks with where Iowa started, and that's a tough one to Northwestern. And, of course, the loss at Purdue. Kind of take me through the progress you've seen from Iowa now from then.
You know, the first week was just kind of, to me, kind of classified as growing pains. And Iowa has a tendency to do that every year, which is why it doesn't really start with any of those big splashy games. It usually opens with a MAC opponent just to kind of work out the kinks and get self ready to play, especially usually against Iowa State, and then next week or the week after. And in this case, it just didn't have that opportunity to work those out. I mean, they had a lot of players that were gone from the previous years. They committed 10 penalties, which is really unlike Iowa, and 2 massive fumbles inside Purdue territory, and lost by 4 points. And then against Northwestern, it was, I think it was a combination of really a poor game plan and poor execution by quarterback Spencer Petras. Asking your sophomore to throw 50 times against that defense is not a very good game plan in my eyes, and certainly not good game calling. But they still only lost by a point. It's just, I thought they were close in those games, obviously to winning, but also just looking good. And then they since then kind of turned it on and ramped it up and looked much better prepared and more disciplined, and in some areas that they've actually are well beyond where they've been in recent years. And I would say certainly running the football, they're better now than they've been in a decade, and defensively they've grown immensely, I would say, over the last 3 weeks.
What were some question marks with the departures? I know Epinesa was gone. I know that Iowa lost Stanley at quarterback, but how confident were Iowa fans about kind of the reload portion, or what was needed? Wirfs is gone. What was needed to reload on both lines of scrimmage, because that's where Iowa's been so good for so long.
I think if you were to ask me, who was the most impactful departure, it was probably A.J. Epineza, because Tristan Wirfs, they did have people who played that position, and nobody's as athletic as Tristan Wirfs, but they could cover for him and play well. But Epineza he was such a good player that they didn't have anybody on the roster who could do everything he did, and that showed up the first game especially. But I think even more noticeable to me once I started watching those games and then rewatched them was the absence of two NFL caliber defensive backs, and against Purdue with David Bell, who's a tremendous wide receiver, and that style of play, they really miscommunicated. They didn't get to their spots they needed to be in pass coverage, and once they made some fatal mistakes. And David Bell's an NFL receiver, and he's caught 3 touchdown passes, including the game winner, when they couldn't decide if they were in man or zone at the goal line. And since then, they've been very, very good. But, that first game, that's a tricky one. And usually, again, Iowa will play at Miami of Ohio and make a few mistakes like that, but it never comes back to beat them. And it certainly did in that week.
Scott Dochterman's with us, Hail Varsity Radio, previewing Nebraska, Iowa, Black Friday. So when we look at Petrus, where is he at in his growth, and what's the ask of him with Iowa? I look at the Goodson, I look at the receiving core, I look at some of the weapons he has. Is he just to keep the car on the road? Is that fair to say?
Well, he needs to do that, and that's been kind of an issue, I would say, most of the year, that he's not as consistent as he needs to be. I thought last week he played probably his best game. He needs to kind of elevate himself to being that of a game manager, maybe not to Nate Stanley's level last year or last couple of years, but he needs to put himself in a position where he can make plays through the air if needed, and he hasn't quite done that yet. And you look at Iowa as a whole, in every area, they've met or exceeded my expectations anyway. They're running the ball better than I thought they would. Defensively, they're, especially the last few weeks, against some pretty good teams offensively, I think they've really played well, but in special teams, that they may be one of the best in the country. But passing game, they're not. And they do have good wide receivers. As you mentioned, they have 4 that are very talented, if not 5. And yet the quarterback's struggling to get the ball there on time and in a lot of different routes. For every 1 good pass, he makes 2 or 3 not so good ones. So I think that's the difference right now for him, is to make the makeable plays. If the receivers are open, hit them. If they're not, well, don't try to force the ball in there, which is what happened against Northwestern. So he's still got room to grow. He's probably not as far along as I thought he'd be, but we could, maybe by the end of the year he'll get there, and I do expect probably an open competition next year, though.
Scott, what's your view on Nebraska as they come in? And Nebraska's had issues at quarterback. Nebraska's had issues on offense, but overall Nebraska's had issues on third down defensively and taking care of the football. The turnovers on offense have been just killers for this team. But this game's been close, and it's been close the last 2 years. Do you expect a tight one in the fourth, or is this going to be Iowa kind of going back to maybe what they did to Nebraska during the Riley era?
When you match everything from the numbers to the styles, I mean, it doesn't suggest that it would be close. But then again, this is college football, and these are college kids, and as you mentioned, there's a trophy on the line, and the Nebraska players haven't beaten Iowa. They've lost 5 straight, so you think that there's going to be a really game effort. They've got some talented players. And, they have to do some things that maybe are uncharacteristic for both programs in order to make it a close, competitive game late in the fourth quarter where it can go either way, and that is Nebraska's going to have to convert on third down. It's also going to have to stop Iowa on third down. It's going to have to control the line of scrimmage. They're going to have to force Iowa to throw and turn over the football, which it did in the first 2 games, but hasn't really the last 3 weeks. So there's a lot of different elements you've got to kind of hope for or not necessarily plan for. I mean, those are usually elements that you kind of go, okay, if it's a close game, then if the turnover battle goes our way, if field position goes our way, then maybe we got a chance. You really kind of have to stretch it. So, I guess I think Iowa is the better team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you throw in a lot of different things, and then things can come out differently, and I would expect a game effort from Nebraska. I would not expect a letdown from Iowa. They've been through too much early this season last summer, so I think you're going to see a very spirited game for both sides.
You kind of hinted at where I was going next. Scott Dochterman's with us, covers the Hawkeyes for The Athletic, at Scott Dochterman on Twitter is where you find him. How have things settled in the locker room and with the coaching staff based on how Iowa's summer has gone? I know that there's some litigation going on, but as far as chemistry and leadership and communication with Kirk and the kids, how is Iowa's headspace right now with all of that?
Yeah, I had a lot of questions during the summer and even early into the season as to whether or not they were going to be able to overcome that, or if that was going to be kind of that that elephant in the room per
right.
se, and losing the first two games, and then the Sunday after the Northwestern loss when Amir Smith-Marset had an OWI, I kind of thought, okay, things are probably getting close to spiraling out of control. Instead, it went the other way. This remains a very close-knit team with good chemistry. They fought together during the summer. They made a lot of changes in the program that made everybody feel more inclusive, that some of the people who felt a little bit outside the box who were brought in under the fold. And so I think, if anything, it's galvanized them, that kind of adversity that can destroy teams and destroy locker rooms. And I had a real question of whether it would do the same with Iowa. Instead, flip the other way. So I think that's impressive for a program that's gone through this much. And so in talking to the players and the coaches, they feel like that it's made them better, more tough, more mentally tough, and and fighting that kind of adversity. And so to come as far as they have, even in a short period of time, I just don't see any kind of letdown, no matter who they face, just because they've come too far to let it all kind of slip away.
Nebraska's been better, Scott, at matching Iowa at the line of scrimmage. I think Nebraska's recruited well, and I think Rogers and specifically Robinson on the interior, along with Snacks, big old 93. So I think Nebraska's better on the interior. I don't know where Nebraska's at on the offensive line. And from your viewpoint, as you've scouted Nebraska just a little bit, kind of what's your takeaway with Nebraska's offensive line? And more specifically, why do you think Nebraska's offense has given Iowa problems the last couple of years?
It's been a combination, I think, the last few years of comebacks. I mean, Iowa's been up a couple of different, both games, I think, up by 2 touchdowns or more, and then Nebraska's made it, has not only hit for big plays, but you just see kind of Iowa out of sorts. It just, for whatever reason, every call, every position has just been out of position, and you've seen that, and as far as the offense, I like the way that they move the quarterback. I think you'd like to see a bell cow running back. I think Wan'Dale Robinson's terrific. It's just a matter of, can he be used all over the place like he's intended, and not just simply as a running back. But I like, the way that they can get those quarterbacks going, because both of them are great athletes. It's just, can they do it consistently against a team that's built to stop the run, that's done a really good job of that in the last few weeks, and is very physical at the point of attack. And, I mean, they do. Last week, for instance, Will Levis had 53 yards, and the team had 53 yards on the first drive, and primarily from Will Levis. Over the last 3 quarters, Penn State had 9 yards.
Right.
So they've been able to slow that down. So I would expect early on Nebraska to kind of feel out Iowa, to get some good yards, and then, where they make their headway is when it looks like Iowa's going to pull away, that they've closed the gap. And if they can do that, then I think that they can make it a competitive game into the fourth quarter.
Scott Dochterman's with us from The Athletic, covers the Hawkeyes, at Scott Dochterman on Twitter. So what does Nebraska mean to Iowa, this program, this staff? Iowa's done a really good job of being consistent, so they've not put one team up on a pedestal above another. They're all big games. Nebraska learned that last weekend. That said, there's the rivalry element to it. And is there a little extra juice from this one, from the Iowa staff and the players, just knowing the streak that exists against Nebraska?
It's interesting because Iowa has 4 trophy games, and they have, great history with Minnesota for the Pig and Wisconsin over, 120, 130 years. And so those games matter as much as any of them. And same thing with Iowa State, which unfortunately they didn't get to play. I think Nebraska's in that. It really, when we've talked about the rivalry component for a lot of years between Iowa and Nebraska, and it kind of, I think both fan bases sway on it a little bit. And really it comes down to, can they ever get to a situation where that game means something to both programs and then possibly to one of the programs and the other team knock them off? Can it draw blood? Can it be a winner-take-all? And I thought, going back to when it first started in 2011 on Black Friday, it was going to. That you pick over 10 years, it's probably at least twice it's going to matter like that, and it really hasn't. So I think once, if we can get, whether it's Nebraska at that level or if Iowa can inch up a little bit higher and get a winner-take-all game for the West Division title, then I think you'll see it kind of elevate, probably in the eyes of both programs, fans, and certainly at Iowa. And then beyond that, if you could get a team where, one's a win away from getting to Indianapolis, maybe even the playoff, and the other team knocking them off, and I think that'll add to it too. So right now I think there's a lot of the rivalry components there, but I think it's among 3 other great rivalries for Iowa.
Scott, a Big Ten question before we let you go, and thanks so much for squeezing us in. With Northwestern, do you think they stay unscathed? They're supposed to on paper. Big Ten's been really wacky. Indiana looked dead at halftime, and they were incredible in the second half last week. But with Coach Fitzgerald, do you think this Northwestern team can continue to be special? They have found a lot of different ways to win, and that's to their credit. Second part, is there an offer Fitz would listen to and maybe look to the NFL?
I'll take your second part. I hope it's the Chicago Bears. As a Bears fan,
you and all the Bears fans are like, yeah, sign him up, move him. Oh, wait a minute, you don't have to.
Oh, right. And to top that off, I'm sure fans in Iowa City and Madison and Lansing and probably Lincoln would be willing to go help him move if he would do that. Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, we'll load the boxes, and we won't do that for our brother, but we'll do it for you. But no, I fully anticipate Northwestern running the table. I think Minnesota's the only team on the schedule that could create some problems for them. I mean, Illinois probably could run in the football a little bit. Minnesota's got enough on offense that it could score some points. How many? It's hard to say. If it's less than 3 touchdowns, I think Northwestern wins. If it's more than that, then it's a different game. And I'll say this, and I'll go out on a limb and say, I think they could be very competitive with Ohio State. I think they have an outstanding defense. And for me to see what they were able to do at Kinnick, they were down 17-0 at Iowa City. Now, if the stadium was full, they're not coming back.
Right.
But it wasn't, and they did what they did. And they put together 2 great drives, and they forced 3 interceptions. I think that they can go to Indianapolis and frustrate Justin Fields and make it a competitive game. Not going to predict a win, but I think they are legitimate. I think they'll go undefeated in regular season play. I think they'll go and give Ohio State a great game and be a great representative to the West Division.
Thanks to Chris Schmidt for that audio. Once again, that was Scott Dochterman with The Athletic. You can hear Chris's full radio show Friday morning from 9 to 11. That'll be before Nebraska kicks off its Black Friday game against Iowa. Joining me now, I've got Jacob Padilla, because Nebraska basketball has officially tipped off its season. Jacob, I believe, is driving home after filing his gamer. Nebraska won 102-55 against McNeese State. I'm just reading the tweet here, Jacob, so don't get mad at me, but these aren't your 2019-20 Huskers, is what it says. Why do you say that?
Well, first off, 83% of the points of the 102 points scored today were by guys who didn't play for the team last year.
So it's literally not the same team.
Correct. But yeah, it looked a lot more like a Fred Hoiberg team and a lot more like a Doc Sadler team too, defensively with their effort on that end. Spacing was good, a lot of ball movement, a lot of open shots. Individually, a lot of different guys made plays. The offensive balance was really good. They had 16 steals and scored 43 points off of 27 forced turnovers. So a lot of different things went well for Nebraska today, and that's what has to happen if you want to crack triple digits.
So was it fun to watch? I mean, was this like a palate cleanser for people after watching some crappy Nebraska football and some not fun to watch Nebraska basketball games last year? Was this a palate cleanser? Are you in a good spirits? How are you right now?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. It definitely was fun to watch. They had some highlight reel plays. Trey McGowan's got up a couple of times for some nice alley-oops and had a couple of dunks too that didn't quite go down that would have brought the house down if there was anybody in there. So it was fun to watching a guy like Delano Banton do a little bit of everything. He had 14 points, 6 assists, 6 rebounds, 4 blocks, 3 steals. And afterward, Fred Hoiberg said that's who Delano is, and that's kind of what they're counting on him for this season. And one interesting thing is Fred Hoiberg talked about kind of narrowing the group down to 6 potential starters yesterday. And he opted to go with the small ball lineup with Lat Mayen at the 5 and Ivan Udrago coming off the bench. And it worked out pretty well today, at least. Lat Mayen knocked down his first 3 3-pointers, got him off to a great start, and then other guys kind of picked it up from there.
Lat shot 7 3-point attempts. He finished with 13 points. He was one of 6 Nebraska players that finished in double digits. What did you think of their small ball lineup of Lat at center? He looks, I mean, he's got legs for days. The dude is incredibly tall. He's the same size as, was it Udrago? As Ivan. It's been a year and I forgot how to pronounce the dude's name.
Yeah.
He's the same size as Ivan in terms of height, but I think, we'll have to wait until they get into Big Ten play to see what happens down low. What did you think of that small ball lineup? Is that going to be sustainable for them, or is he going to kind of mix and match depending on what the matchup is?
Yeah, that is kind of the biggest question, I think, facing the team, obviously, with kind of some development surrounding the team that we found out today as well in terms of their center depth. But for this game, it absolutely worked out. There were a couple of times where I thought McNeese State's big guys got kind of in close position and scored pretty easily inside. But for the most part, defensively, they held up pretty well. And, again, they had a lot of different guys in the passing lanes, using that length kind of really harass players and to get the forced turnovers and turn it the other way. And that's what Fred Hoiberg said they're going to have to do this year. They're going to have to generate offense off of turnovers. They're going to have to get other teams fed up because of that lack of true size in the post. And Ivan got in and he did some things on the glass and whatever, but he really struggled offensively. And he's going to have to play better for them, especially because we found out today that Derek Walker will be suspended for 16 games, dating back to something that happened while he was still at Tennessee. And Eduardo Andre, the freshman center they brought in this year, he was not in the building today. And we got a release after the game from Nebraska stating that a player that did not play today had tested positive and has been in isolation. And he was the only only eligible player on the roster that did not play today. So you can kind of connect the dots there. So this small ball lineup is going to have to work. It's going to have to be a team effort with guys helping each other out. If we do see Nebraska go up against some teams with true post players, which we know that will happen in the Big Ten. But for now, I think Fred Hoiberg liked what he got out of that look in Game 1.
They forced 27 turnovers. They had 43 points off those turnovers. They had 29 fast break points, shot 50% from the field, 42% from 3. You said this in the beginning that this looked like more of a Fred Hoiberg team. How much of this was just it was McNeese State, and how much of this was or how much of this do you think was more of this is a team that has the tools that a Fred Hoiberg team has to run what he wants to run?
Yeah, I think the 102 points was a matter of the competition more so than anything, but the way they played and the kind of success they had in certain areas I definitely think they've got the personnel to keep playing that way against other competition. Now, there were certainly some areas that you would have liked to see them do better, and there's still some question marks as Nebraska moves on to face other high major teams with more size and more athleticism. They didn't finish great at the rim all the time, and that wasn't just Ivan. So that's something they're going to have to shore up. There were some bad decisions in terms of they had a few charges early where guys were just kind of crashing through the defender. You got to do a little better job of decision making there and kind of reading the defense and make the right play. But for the most part, they made a lot of simple plays. They shared the ball, 19 assists to 10 turnovers. I think Fred will take that ratio all game or all season long. So there are a lot of things to be excited about with this team in terms of how they're going to be able to play this season.
They also made 20 free throws.
Yeah, I got off to a little bit rough start there, but towards the end there, they started picking it up and picking that percentage up to about 69%.
Okay, I got to ask, do you have the stat sheet in front of you? Because all of these numbers I have it in front of me. All of these numbers are right on the money. Do you have it in front of you while you're driving, or you just have a photographic memory?
No, I actually have not left the parking lot yet. So I figured it would be a little easier to do this while I had the stat sheet up, and while I didn't want to have to focus on driving while I was talking to you. So I want to give you my full attention.
I appreciate that. Do you have AirPods?
No, just regular headphones.
You should try to get a pair of AirPods for Black Friday or like for Christmas. Those things changed my life. You can talk in the car. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this because I don't know if it's illegal to have them both in your ear when you're driving, but I use them when I'm driving because it's super easy to talk in the car.
We'll see. My brother has a pair, but I've just always gone with kind of cheap headphones. It's been working for me.
What surprised you most about what you saw on the court?
It surprised me.
Was there anything?
I don't know that there's anything that really surprised me. Again, considering the competition and the players on the roster and everything like that. One thing that was good to see was Trey McGowan's coming out and knocking down both of his three-point shots. He's a guy that struggled a little bit, was about 31% last year at Pitt. And Fred Hoiberg spoken highly of his improvement and his development as a shooter. And again, he only took two of them today, but both of them went down. They both look good. And that'll be huge if they can get some shooting from guys not named Sawyer Thorby and Arneson and Lapman. And those two combined for 5 of their 10 3-pointers today. So they did get a little bit of help from some other guys, including redshirt freshman Jake Piatkowski out there, knocking down the corner 3 for his first career points to give Nebraska 100 for the game. So I'm sure that was pretty cool for him and his family to see that. So it was good. Kind of got Brett Porter some playing time down the stretch too. There got his first minute. So even got their walk-ons in, and Elijah Wood, their other freshman. So everybody that was eligible got a chance to play today. Got at least 3 minutes. So that's kind of what you want out of a season opener like this, or give everybody a chance and keep the minutes down and really balance things out.
What was the atmosphere and what was it like inside Pinnacle Bank Arena?
It was really weird. They're playing this crowd noise that it just does not sound natural. It really does sound like kind of a weird recording of crowd noise, and they kind of play it throughout the game. It's not like NFL games where you see teams kind of like playing boos and cheers and kind of changing the volume at different times, reacting to the game. It's just kind of a steady noise in the background throughout the whole game. And that was bizarre. Nebraska did not allow any people into the building outside of the teams, the arena staff, and the media. So we did see the Golden Window Classic. At least there were some family members for North Dakota State for the game after Nebraska's today. So theirs is a little different, but at least for Nebraska's non-conference game, the stands were completely empty outside of kind of photographers. So it definitely was. I've been covering games that have been a little different with a reduced crowd, but I haven't been to one that's been completely empty yet this season. So it was kind of surreal coming out and walking in like I did and seeing nobody around.
not even having families there, is that a Nebraska decision or a Big Ten decision?
That's probably something that I should get clarified, but I'm not sure.
But you said there were at least like parents, select parents in there for the North Dakota State Nevada game afterward.
Correct. North Dakota State has a Lincoln East graduate, Sam Griesel, on the team. So I'm sure most of the people there were probably his family, but there was a small, I kind of tweeted out a picture if people want to see, just that was the only group in the building for it. I didn't necessarily count, but there were a small amount. So we'll kind of see what things look like tomorrow when Nebraska plays Nevada.
This is almost an entirely new team, like you said. Wade Draugo, because I know how to pronounce his name, and Thorbjarnarson are the only two that played last year, correct?
Correct.
Were you
with a Cole rope and missing the season? Yes.
Right. Were you surprised that Thor kept his starting spot? Were you surprised that Ivan lost his starting spot?
So a little bit, just based on kind of, I wasn't sure if Fred wanted to leave Lat at the 5 and kind of subject him to playing against bigger guys for that long and kind of having him playing full time at that spot. That was kind of a little surprising. I'm not terribly surprised. I think most of us thought that Thor would move to the bench this season just based on the guys they brought in and kind of some of the options, but he continues to do all the right things. And Fred Hoiberg loves the way he plays and how smart he is and how disciplined he is. I mean, today he was the primary defender on Drew Kuchthausen, the Scottsbluff native who led the country in three-pointers made last year and shot almost 46%. And he's the guy that was chasing him around screens, and Drew led him in scoring with 11 points. But, he was 3 of 8 from 3, and most of those were contested. So Thor did a great job of kind of limiting his options and then knocked down a couple of three-pointers and got a nice little floating layup himself. So he just continues to do the right things with his offensive movement, his ball movement, and defensively being in the right spot. So those are the kind of players that coaches always love, guys that you know exactly what you're going to get from them. And I think he does a good job of balancing out some of those other guys in that starting lineup.
Really, really high-level thinker. What are your expectations for this team? It's still early enough that I can ask you this question. What are your expectations of this team this year?
I really have no idea. I don't think they're a 13th place team in the Big Ten just based on the pieces they have. And today, I didn't see enough to be all gung ho and like move them up to like 5th in the conference or something like that. But I didn't see enough that has me worried that they're going to go win 2 games in the conference again or whatever. I think they're going to be a competitive team in the Big Ten this year. Now, how many of these games go their way? They're obviously going to play a lot of really good teams in the conference this year. That we still have to. I need to kind of see a few more games, see how they handle the rest of this non-conference slate before I feel strongly about where I might project them within the Big Ten hierarchy. But I definitely don't think they're going to be at the bottom of the conference as much as they were last year. They're going to have a chance to beat some of these teams and compete every time they step out there, and that's a big difference from what we saw last year.
Fair enough. Reason for people to be optimistic or even excited, maybe, depending on how this football season closes out. Well, Jacob, I'll let you get on the road, let you get home. Thank you for coming on the podcast, giving some time and talking basketball. I'm sure you're happy about that.
Yeah, looking forward to finally diving in here and getting going with this. This is the longest offseason any of us have ever experienced. So I feel like I've talked about this team so many times. It's gotten to the point where, like what football happened earlier this year, we're like, all right, there's nothing really else I can say about this team. I need some games to actually process and analyze here. So excited about that. Hopefully we can, fingers crossed, that we can keep this going.
Yep. All right. Thanks, buddy. That'll do it for this week. We will have coverage of football and basketball on HailVarsity.com throughout the weekend. Hope everybody enjoys their Thanksgiving Thursday. I hope everybody's able to enjoy Black Friday. I hope. We'll see. We'll see. Thanks to Brandon for coming on. Thanks to Jacob for coming on. Thanks to Chris Schmidt for lending us his interview with Scott Dochterman. Thanks to Scott for doing that. Like I said, we'll have coverage through the weekend. Basketball will play Thursday afternoon. They'll play again on Saturday. Football obviously has the noon kickoff on Friday. So just keep reading HailVarsity.com. Subscribe to all of the Hail Varsity podcast offerings through the Herd App Media Network. It's HailVarsity.com/network. Go there. You can get all of the Hail Varsity podcast offerings. You can get them every single day. Sasha has one. Thanks to Sasha for producing today. We'll be back next week.